Good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining the HR Daily Advisor for our Employee Retention and Turnover keynote session. Today's session is entitled Communication Rhythms That Drive Employee Engagement and Retention. Before we dive into our session today, I do want to cover some housekeeping items and introductions. So to start, my name is Michelle DiFrancesco with the HR Daily Advisor, and I'm here as your host for today's session. To get us started, the console that you're looking at right now offers a few different application widgets that you can use during our presentation today. The most important widget on your screen is called the Media Player widget, and this is where you can control the volume for today's session. Please do take note that there is no dial-in number for our attendees today, and the audio is streaming directly from your computer speakers, so be sure they're turned up and on. You don't want to miss any part of today's session. However, if you do have to step away for any reason, or if you do miss any part of our session today, we are recording it, and we'll be sending out a copy of the recording to each of you via email in about 24 hours, so keep your eyes open for that. In the event that anyone on the line today experiences any technical difficulty, please feel free to let us know the issue that you're experiencing by hopping on into the Q&A widget, and we'll be happy to assist you today. And speaking of that Q&A widget, we're really excited to hear from you today. And we'd love to see your questions on today's topic. So feel free to submit any questions that you have at any point throughout our session today, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of our presentation during our live Q&A session. And available to all attendees today is something called the Attendee Chat widget. This is where you can communicate with each other as well as with us as presenters. And keep your eyes out, we may be asking you some questions during today's presentation. So let's test that attendee chat widget out and let us know your name and where you're logging in from today. One final note, today's session has been approved for 1 hour of HRCI and SHRM recertification credits, and we'll announce at the close of today's session how you can obtain your credit information. And with that, let's dive into introductions. I'm really excited to welcome our guest speaker today, LeAnne Lagasse, HR consultant and keynote speaker. If you wish to learn more about LeAnne, you can hop on into the speaker bio widget on your screen for more information. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. And LeAnne, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle. And hi, everyone. I love seeing Jersey and New York and Canada and Tennessee. I'm coming to you from Texas. I live in West Texas in Lubbock. And so I'm thrilled that you're here. We are going to jump right in, and we're going to talk about a topic that is really, it's always been important, but it is especially important right now. And we're going to talk a little bit about why, and that is engagement and retention. And what are some things that we can do as HR professionals, as people leaders, to drive engagement and retention in our organization. So the first thing I would love to do, again, we're going to test out the attendee chat again, is would you share in the chat maybe what are some of the biggest challenges that you uniquely face in your organization when it comes to employee engagement and retention? And as you're hopefully putting some of those things in the chat, what I'll share is what I hear from leaders all across the country that I talk to about this topic on a regular basis. And one of the things that I hear often is, it feels like something shifted dramatically. And, I don't know what happened in 2020-ish that just dramatically, restructured the way that we think about work, the way that, our team members think about work. It feels like something shifted. It feels harder. It feels like the things that used to work are not working in the same way. So I'm looking at some of the chat right now, right? Our employees are remote. Absolutely. So how do we engage remote or distributed employees, hybrid, right? Leadership, leadership, not taking it seriously. Absolutely. Having employees even just read the emails or the communication that we send out to them. Amen to that. Lack of leadership, compensation, absolutely. Management located in different places than our employees. So thank you so much for those of you that are sharing. And what I want you to know is what I'm seeing come across here is so common. It's so consistent. So you are definitely not alone in whatever unique challenges that you're facing. My hope for today is that as we talk a little bit about the research around employee engagement and retention, as we talk about some of these strategies, that you're going to have some tools to think critically about, okay, so in light of what LeAnne has shared, what can I take back and apply in my very unique context? Because sadly, I can't give you the formula, all the specific things that you need to do in your organization. What I can share is some tried and true research, what we know drives engagement and retention in any environment. So that's the good news, right? Is we can learn what drives it, and then we can figure out what does that look like in our unique organization. So what I want to do is I want to start by sharing just a little bit of current research about engagement and retention. So according to the Gallup organization, right now in the United States, about 31, it kind of depends on which week that you're talking about, but about 31 to 32% of our employees are what we call engaged. Well, what does that even mean? We throw around that term a lot. Here's what it means. Engagement is how involved in, committed to, and enthusiastic a team member is about two things: about the role that they're in, so they feel connected to the day-to-day work, they feel good about the alignment, with their strengths and their skill set and the role, but also they feel involved in, committed to, and enthusiastic about the organization as a whole. So the most engaged employees are those that say, I really enjoy my role and I'm really proud to work for this organization. And as you can see here, it's about 31% of our employees statistically would be highly engaged. You'll notice that kind of dashed line at the bottom that says 17. That is Gallup's tracking of what we call active disengagement. So disengaged employees are the opposite of our engaged employees. On their best days, although I probably shouldn't say it that way, but a disengaged person on their best days is someone who kind of shows up, does the bare minimum, kind of goes along to get along. On their worst days, those active disengaged employees are actually spreading disengagement. They sort of show up frustrated about their role and also about the organization. So we're sitting at about 31% right now. You all feel that every single day. I know that you do. In addition to that, okay, we also know that right now in the United States, about 1 in 2, like 50% of our employees say that they are open to leaving the organization. What's interesting about this is this has shifted. You'll notice a little bit on the chart there from 2020. This has shifted a bit. Before the pandemic, it really took, like if you look around 2019, it really took a lot for our most engaged employees to say that they were open to leaving the organization. But now, post-pandemic, we've seen a rise in even engaged employees saying, I'm happy here, I enjoy the work I'm doing, but I'm curious what else is out there, or I'd be open to it. So if you're an HR leader, you're a people leader, you're an organizational leader of any kind, these are the kinds of things that can feel like major barriers to driving engagement and retention. And, lest you think that I'm here just to sort of depress you with all the stats, what I want to encourage you with is that there are so many organizations right now who are just thriving when it comes to driving engagement and retention. But in my experience, what differentiates them from those that are struggling, which is frankly the majority of organizations, it's a mindset issue and it's also a systems issue, right? So we're going to talk about both of those things today. My grandpa used to tell me, hope is not a strategy. And so I think about that a lot in the work that I do. And the reason I say that is because so many leaders have amazing intentions when it comes to engagement and retention. I have yet to meet one who says to me, you know what, how could I create an environment so toxic, so miserable that everybody wants to leave, right? Most leaders really want to thrive. They want their employees to thrive and flourish. But the problem is that we tend to have an incorrect mindset when it comes to engagement. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations think that what employees really want for engagement, for retention, is they want us to sort of roll out a red carpet for them. Maybe not literally, but figuratively. I don't know. You may say, LeAnne, you don't know. I do have some that want us to roll out the red carpet for them, literally. But the issue is organizational leaders tend to think that it's these really big, powerful initiatives, these really big things that drive engagement and retention. I am a big fan of a powerful moment. It's just that while we think that engagement happens in these big moments, it's actually not the big moments that drives engagement and retention. So to illustrate this, I've got just a personal story I can share. a couple of years ago, I was contacted by a client, a brand new client, and they wanted to have me help them with an employee listening initiative. So we were going to conduct anonymous and confidential survey, and then we were going to follow that up with some targeted focus groups and get some, sense of what was going on in these unique corners of the organization. Well, right before they engaged with me, they had just completed, the HR team and the executive leaders had just spent who knows how much time, energy, and money on this really big, powerful offsite, weekend for their team, which, by the way, I'm still a fan of a good offsite. I facilitate offsites, but they had just planned this very big offsite. They spent so much money. They actually gave cash gifts to employees for them to get to go on like a shopping spree. And they were, as leaders, kind of riding this high thinking, wow, isn't this amazing that we were able to do this for our employees to show them how much we value them? Well, you may see where this is going. I come in, I've got my consultant hat on. I conduct a listening initiative with them, an employee engagement survey. And would you believe that like a month after this big initiative, the number one weakness that showed up in their engagement data was, guess what? It was, I don't feel very valued in this organization. And when I tell you that those leaders were so discouraged, and understandably so, and maybe you felt that way because you're thinking, we have such good intentions and we're just struggling to get the impact that we want. So these leaders were really discouraged because from their perspective, they had done so much. They'd rolled out the red carpet, so to speak. I will never forget, I was sitting in a focus group just about a week or so after we got all this data back with this team. And there was a employee in the group, and she said, we were talking about ideas for how to kind of improve their, feeling valued in the workplace. And she said, it's kind of like when you're in a relationship with somebody and you feel seen and heard and valued and respected every day. When they do something big, like spend a lot of money on you, it's icing on the cake. That's the way she phrased it. And she said, but when you don't feel seen, heard, and valued on a day-to-day basis, when that person, in this case, it would be leaders, spend a lot of money on you, it actually feels a little bit hurtful and maybe even offensive. And everybody else in the room kind of had this collective, yes, this is how we feel. And I think that captures the heart of what I want to communicate to you today, which is if we want to drive engagement and retention, we may think that it's happening in these very big moments, but what the research shows is it's actually happening in that slow drip of very strategic communication, specifically strategic communication across the employee life cycle, so that our employees on a day-to-day basis are getting those engagement driver needs met, right? It's not something that just happens once a month or even once a week. It's something that is a slow drip built by strong systems and good mindset from leadership. That slow drip is what builds engagement and retention in the long run. So much so, check this out. So the Gallup organization conducted a large study to determine of all of the leadership activities, that leaders can do to drive engagement and retention and also to drive high performance relationships, what are the ones that move the needle the most? And I think this is so cool. Now, my background is in higher education. I was a professor in the College of Media and Communication at Texas Tech University for 14 years. So communication is kind of my thing. I'm a little biased, but I think this is such good news if you're a leader or if you're a people leader or an HR leader. And that is, Gallup found that having one meaningful conversation per week with a team member develops high performance relationships more than any other leadership activity. I mean, think about that. Any other leadership activity, having meaningful, slow drip conversations with team members developed high performance relationships more than anything else. And that really aligns with some other research that we know about the significance of the leader. And I know many of you mentioned that sometimes it's the leaders in our organizations that are the biggest challenge. And maybe you're a leader and you feel this weightiness on a day-to-day basis too. But 70% of the variance in employee engagement is determined solely by the people manager. Now, that's not to say that there aren't structural or systemic things that do impact engagement, but it is to say that the people manager, the leader, drives the vast majority of engagement and retention in our organizations. Now, if you're an HR leader, you're a people leader, that can feel a little discouraging sometimes. At least the leaders that I work with will say that's the problem, is maybe we know that and we're struggling to figure out how to equip our leaders to do that, to drive engagement or to get buy-in. And I hear you. I hear you. It's such a challenge, but it's a fight worth fighting, because if you want to improve engagement and retention, you will be very hard pressed to find an organization who's doing that well without buy-in from their leaders. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what are 3 strategies, 3 communication rhythms that you can use in your organization across the employee life cycle to drive engagement and retention, because that's what it's about. It's not about the big initiatives. It's not about employee of the quarter, which, by the way, can be an awesome thing that you do in addition to the things we're going to talk about today. It's not about that big stuff. It's about the slow drip of communication across the employee life cycle. So let's jump in and let's talk about the very first. The first rhythm, and this is one that is, I don't know a better word to use than this. It's not like the sexiest, for lack of a better way to say that, of all of the strategies. But listen to me. This is the hill to die on when it comes to engagement and retention. And that is having consistent, that slow drip, role and expectations clarifying conversations. I know that's a little bit of a mouthful, but both of those things, roles and expectations, are an important part of this. So maybe some of you on the session today might remember, maybe you learned when you were in college or something, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the idea there is, hey, as human beings, until our basic like physiological needs are met, we are not concerned about like, am I reaching my loftiest goals? Am I self-actualized? Do I feel like I belong somewhere? Because we're worried about those basic physiological safety needs first. The research on employee engagement and retention is very similar. So think of it as kind of its own hierarchy of needs. What we know is at the base of that hierarchy is clear expectations around roles and around what success looks like in our role. Now, you may be listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, obviously we're in the work of, thinking about roles a lot and we're building job descriptions. But here's what I want to share with you. This is a bit of a roller coaster. That's how you got to roll with me, is it's like good news, bad news, good news, bad news. So here's a little bit of bad news, that right now, okay, in the United States, only 45% of employees say that they know what is expected of them at work. Now, again, you might be thinking, well, that's good news because we just revamped our job descriptions, or we've worked really hard on, our role clarity. And I applaud you for that. That is important work. But what I want to caution you against is assuming that you're not, or that your employees are not experiencing what we call role ambiguity. And check this out too. That number, that 45%, actually drops to 30% in scientific, technical, or computer-related jobs. So if that applies to you, you can just know statistically, not even a third of our employees probably know what's expected of them. And here's the thing. When employees are answering that question about, do I know what's expected of me? It rarely has anything to do with their actual job description. More oftentimes than not, it has to do with their thoughts about, what kind of decision-making agency do I have in my role? What am I expected to communicate up or across or down? Who am I expected to loop in to this conversation? And so when your employees have those kind of questions, what does success look like? They can struggle with something that I want you to think about as this collective villain in your organization, and that is this guy, role ambiguity. Now, I did have somebody tell me a couple of weeks ago that this guy doesn't look villainy enough, and I think that's a fair critique. But I chose this image because he looks like a little sneaky, right? He's just kind of under the radar. He's sneaky. But the reason I say that role ambiguity is your villain is because most organizations are not building good systems and structures to mine for role ambiguity and then to kind of mitigate it and to build what we call role clarity. So if you're kind of wondering, okay, well, what does that look like? This villain, he's peeking around every corner. He wants to throw everybody off. What might that look like? you're in for, so you're in for it, because I've got role ambiguity red flags to talk about. So this is not an exhaustive list, of course, but these are some things that we tend to see in organizations that struggle a lot with role ambiguity. And again, remember, that's the base of that hierarchy, if you will, for employee engagement. So the first red flag for role ambiguity is when in an organization there is a lot of misalignment on vision and strategy. So this sounds like when people say, wait a minute, why are we doing that? That doesn't seem like it connects to our strategy at all. Or why would they recommend that? When you start hearing phrases like that or disclosures like that, or maybe if you're a leader and you're going, why would my team member have been working on this as opposed to this, right? When at its root, really what's going on there is role ambiguity. It's misalignment, but underneath the misalignment is confusion about what success looks like. Also, sometimes leaders will call me and they'll say, LeAnne, I wish my employees would take more ownership. I wish they were more accountable. And one of the things that I often do with clients like that from the very beginning, not affirm them, but to say probably what's going on is more ambiguity about role and success than you realize. And if you start digging and you improve this, you will see employees take more ownership because they have more clarity, right? Another one of my favorite, if you will, red flags for role ambiguity is when you start to sense increased conflict or tension, or my favorite, turf wars. It is a red flag. What I mean by turf wars is when people start either kind of in the worst sense, kind of like jockeying for position, or using even kind of gatekeeping behavior, that can be a symptom of role ambiguity. But even in like very cordial organizations where maybe the conflict isn't off the charts, turf wars sound something like this. If you hear disclosures like this, it's a red flag. Why was so-and-so invited into that meeting? Or I thought that was our initiative, or I wonder why we weren't consulted about that. Those kind of disclosures, that's turf wars. And it is often, again, a big giant red flag for role ambiguity. Very similar, I kind of touched on it a moment ago, is when you start to see gatekeeping behavior, whether it's intentional or unintentional, where people start to feel like they don't have access to decision-making frameworks, when they start to feel like we don't understand what's happening at the top, we feel like there's a limited information or resources to help us get to good outcomes in our jobs. That's also a symptom of role ambiguity. Here's a few more: hesitation in decision making, and also frequent reassignments. So this is kind of like leadership by whiplash, where maybe you've got, okay, here's what we're going to do. This happens a lot in agile organizations, by the way, or organizations that are scaling or growing, is like, here's the plan. And everybody goes, awesome, we got the plan. And everybody starts moving in that direction. And then the next day it's, just kidding, here's the new plan. And so everybody, oh, okay, we've got whiplash. That can be another sign of role ambiguity. So these are just a few examples of what this might look like. But the reason I wanted to show you this is because, it's one thing just to hear a stat like 50%, only 45% of employees know what's expected of them. And it's another thing to sort of have to look at a list like this and think, oh yeah, that actually does affect us and our team pretty frequently. And if you have a team that is struggling with role ambiguity, it is going to be very hard for you to drive high levels of employee engagement and retention, because it is the foundation of those things. So in organizations that are doing a really good job mining for role ambiguity and mitigating it and then building clarity, they are having those consistent conversations across the employee life cycle. Conversations like, okay, what is our priority today? So it's leaders helping set priority, but it's also the organization as a whole. It may be the HR function or the people function helping set priority about what successful leadership looks like, right? What's the priority? Where is there ambiguity? Okay, here's a pro tip for you. If you're a leader, instead of asking the question, do you know what's expected of you? Or does that make sense? Or is that clear? Because if you ask that question, you'll probably get a yes, sir, yes, ma'am, absolutely. But if you ask a better question, you'll get better data. If you ask instead, okay, I'm curious, where is there ambiguity with respect to this change process or with respect to your role as a leader? Where is there ambiguity? What happens is you have invited the truth to float to the surface. In a lot of my executive coaching, actually will do this. I will assign to my leaders, I want you to go talk to all of your direct reports. I want you to ask them, where is there ambiguity in their role or with respect to this project or whatever it is? And then I want you to report back to me what they say. And if I can just tell you that most of the time they're kind of nodding at me like, okay, sure. But I know the research and I know that probably what's going to happen is they're going to get so much more than they realized. A couple of weeks ago, I did this with one of my new coaching clients. He sent me an email back and I had to just scroll down several paragraphs because he had so much data. And he said at the very top of the email, like in all caps, he said, I had no idea that my team felt this way. So asking a better question, right, on a regular basis, that slow drip, where is there ambiguity, is going to help you build engagement and retention. Similarly, the best organizations are facilitating conversations on a regular basis. What does success look like? And how does my unique role contribute to the overall success of the team and the organization? So in the best organizations, employees are able to link their role and their unique goals to the organization's mission, right? And you can see here on the screen, employees who agree that they can link their goals to the organization goals are 3 times more likely to be engaged in their jobs. And when I've shared with you earlier that we're just sitting at 31%, what this says to me is we can organizationally get better at helping people see the connection between the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis and the overall strategy and goals of the organization. Here's some more bad news. Ready? We're roller coastering it. Right now, the Gallup organization has coined this term. It's always like the great this, the great that, but we've got a new great, and it's the great detachment. And this chart might be a little bit tricky to look at, but what I really want you to pay attention to is that we are at a record low right now, that according to Gallup, only 30% of employees believe that the mission or the purpose of their organization makes them feel that their job is important, right? And that's the important part. The emphasis was intentional there, that the mission or purpose of my organization makes me feel like my job is important. Only 30% of our team members statistically would say that that's the case. So if that's true, and it is, well, what are some things that we need to do? As HR leaders, as people leaders, we need to make sure that we are doing our part to facilitate conversations, not only with our own team, but also to equip leaders across the organization to facilitate these kind of conversations on a regular basis. Every team member should know, one, okay, why does our organization exist? What is our unique mission? And it's funny because sometimes when I work with organizations, leaders will say, oh, I'm pretty sure our team can do that. I'm pretty sure they can. And I'll say, let's test it. Let's see. And it is very often the case that employees struggle even to know how to respond to that question. So we've got to do a better job with that slow drip communication about why we exist, what's our mission. But then we're going to kind of layer that. We're going to move downward and we're going to get more focused. Okay, why does our unique team exist? What is our unique team's mission? How does our unique team contribute to the organization's mission? But when I work with organizations, kind of helping them with alignment here, this is an area where we usually do a lot of work. And that is trying to help the team form a unique identity relative to its function, but also to the overall goals and strategy of the organization. So why does the team exist? And then you probably see where this is going. Why does my role exist? How does my role contribute to our team and our organizational mission? And then by extension, what impact do I have on others? And if you can get every person in your organization to, with some conversational fluidity, to be able to answer these kinds of questions, you are on your way to building role clarity and kicking that role ambiguity guy out, because people feel certain about what their role is, what success looks like, and how that affects the overall vision and mission of the organization. One of my very favorite stories that I like to share when I teach and train on this topic is a story about when JFK, when we were in the space race, right? The United States were in the space race, and JFK goes to NASA headquarters. And the story goes that, of course, it was like a big media, PR, promotional blitz. He goes to NASA headquarters. He's touring. He's meeting with just these scientists and these astronauts, and he's walking around the building. And the story goes that he runs into a janitor that's sweeping, and he has a brief conversation with this janitor, and he asks him, "And what is it that you do here?" And the story goes that the janitor, without skipping a beat, said, "I'm helping to send a man to the moon." Now, you might think that's a little cheesy, but listen, when I hear that, it pumps me up, because what that says to me is that somebody in that organization was doing a phenomenal job at what you see here on this screen. They were doing a phenomenal job of helping every person in the organization see how the work they were doing on a day-to-day basis is connecting to the whole point, the whole reason that we're here. So if you want to drive engagement and retention, it's so important that you figure out a way specifically to equip your people managers, who drive 70% of engagement, to nurture role clarity and to continually communicate performance expectations. We've talked about a couple of ways that you can do that, but I'd love to hear in the chat if you have something that is working really well in your organization to build role clarity. Please share it in the chat so that you all can benefit from one another as well. Because again, it's one thing to sort of know, here's what the research says, and then it's another thing to figure out, okay, what does that look like practically in my unique organization? So if you've got something that's working really well, please share, spread the wealth, share the information. I'm sure everybody would love to learn from you. All right, so we got to keep moving though, because I would stay here with you for another 4 hours if you would let me. But we got to keep moving. We're going to talk now about the second rhythm. So remember though, the first, those role clarifying conversations and having them on that slow drip basis where we're not just doing this one time, we're making it a consistent rhythm. That's the hill to die on, and that it moves the needle more than almost anything else you can do with engagement and retention. A close second is what we're going to talk about next. That is communication rhythm number 2, and that is personalized recognition moments. Now, my friends, this is the point in the workshop or the session where I start to lose some people. And I totally understand why. Because when we hear the word recognition, we all kind of have our own connotations with that. Our connotations about whether we've felt supported and seen and heard and valued. Maybe we felt burned by employees in the past that didn't feel seen, heard, or valued. We have our own kind of triggers when it comes to this. I have found that this is one of the most controversial, if you will, or like tender, raw topics that I teach. What's fascinating about that is the research is so clear. So we've got feelings about this in many cases, but the research is so clear that personalized recognition just will make engagement and retention skyrocket, okay? When employees believe that their leaders and their team members are going to recognize them, they are 4 times more likely to be engaged at work. Here's the thing. Similar to what I said at the beginning, where we think that what employees want is to roll out the red carpet for them. Now, again, you may have, 1 or 2, hopefully not more than 1 or 2 that feel that way. But actually what the research shows is employees are not saying, buy us stuff, now maybe, compensation is a piece of that, but like spend money on us randomly, throw us a pizza party, buy a ping pong table, whatever it is. That's not what they're asking for when it comes to recognition. What they say is hurtful is when they are putting in hard work and they don't feel respected or valued or seen for the contributions that they're making. So when organizations do a really good job with recognition, they see drastic improvements. Sometimes I will tell leaders, this is very low-hanging fruit to grow your engagement and retention. Because if you don't, it is the one of the biggest drivers of turnover. And again, I am preaching to the choir here. I know that your HR leaders, your people leaders, you see this, you feel this on a day-to-day basis. But employees who report that they're not adequately recognized, maybe even replace that in your mind with who don't feel seen and valued for their work, are 3 times more likely to say that they'll quit in the next year. So you can often see it's when I'm looking at engagement data, when I'm helping clients, I can see a link between the how employees respond to those items about feeling valued and turnover, right? There is like a very short line between those two things. So if you are to improve recognition, you're going to see improvements. And here's why, right? A little bit of neuroscience for you. I won't go too deep here, I promise. But recognition and belonging, when we feel seen and valued, and when we feel like we belong as a result of our contributions, that activates the reward and safety centers in our brain, and that releases dopamine. So think like a dopamine hit. And also oxytocin, which we sometimes will call the trust hormone or the love hormone. Probably shouldn't have used that kind of emphasis when I said love. You know what I mean? Those are the same chemicals that make people feel valued and connected and motivated to contribute. So when you have not a huge initiative, not the red carpet moment, but when you are in a regular rhythm in your organization of sending recognition and belonging messages, you will see engagement and retention improve. One story that I often share when I talk about this topic is it's an important one because I think it kind of captures some of what that dissonance is I touched on earlier. I was presenting a few years ago to a group, and it was a group of leaders, and I was talking about the science of recognition. And up to that point, there was this gentleman in the back, and he'd been leading for a really long time and so much experience, so brilliant. And I felt the whole time that I was presenting like we were tracking, we were on the same page. And he's with me, he's nodding. And, if you're a speaker, if you've ever presented, like sometimes that's a good feeling. You're like, okay, I'm tracking with this guy back here. So as soon as I started talking about recognition, I could see him it was like, and I lost him. I lost him a little bit. And by the way, that doesn't bother me at all because I know that we all have really unique feelings and thoughts about the recognition piece. But afterwards, he came up to me and his words, he said, well, you had me until you started talking about participation trophies. That was what he said. And so I kind of joked with him. I said, oh, is that what I said? I didn't remember framing it that way exactly. And we were kind of laughing about it. And he got serious for a moment and he said, it's just, I don't understand why employees need that kind of constant affirmation because I don't feel like I've ever really needed that. Well, who am I to sort of invalidate his experience? So of course I'm not going to argue or debate with him in the moment. So what I did instead was I said, well, tell me about the very best team that you've ever been on. And his eyes lit up, and he was a veteran. And he started telling me the story about the best, team that he was on when he was in the military. And he's telling me about how much they cared about each other and they were like brothers, and we were willing to die for each other. And I know that's much more intense than for most of us what our workplaces are like every day. But he said, I felt like I was a part of a family on that team. And so I just very casually said to him, I said, okay, I said, that's awesome. How did you all know that? How did you know that? And he, without thinking about what he was saying, he goes, oh, we told each other all the time. And then he heard himself and he goes, oh, I see what you did there. Right. And I kind of was laughing. And the point of that is to say that in the moment he realized, oh, so those disclosures, at the moments where I'm telling my teammate, in this case, I'm someone I'm serving with, that, hey man, I love you. You're like a brother to me. Right? That's recognition, albeit that looks very different than the kind of recognition that many of us are trying to facilitate every day. But the point stands, and that is that when you feel seen and heard and cared for, right, you feel better about the team, you feel better about the organization. And it's that dopamine hit, it's activating your reward and your safety center. So, what are some things that we can do to build better recognition rhythms? Well, good news, bad news is that it does require your people leaders, your people managers being on board and realizing that they will get high performing team members, higher engaged team members when they start that slow drip rhythm of recognition. But here's some of what we know about recognition. Uh, it's interesting that in the research, gratitude messages are not the same thing as recognition messages. All right. So gratitude messages, still very important, by the way, but gratitude messages sound like, thank you so much for getting, that report to me. Right. That's a gratitude message. By the way, keep sending those messages. But gratitude messages do not activate the same reward center that we were talking about just a moment ago. Gratitude messages are different than recognition messages. Recognition messages that work are those that are concrete and specific. And what I mean by that is they speak to something that is very nuanced and, again, very deliberate. So it's the difference between saying something like, great job in the meeting today, which could very well be perceived as a recognition message. Again, that's a great message. We need to send more of those. But it's a difference between something that feels a little bit vague, like great job in the meeting today, and something that is so concrete and specific and also individualized to the person that is, hey, I just wanted to tell you the way that you handled that objection, from our CEO or whatever, in that meeting today was right on. Your critical thinking skills in the moment were unbelievable, right? You hear the difference? I just made that up off the top of my head, but you can hear the difference between something that is more general and non-specific and something that feels so concrete and individualized to the talent or the strength of that person. So this is that slow drip that we want to build. Do people feel seen and heard and valued for their unique contributions? We also know that recognition that works is often aligned with the organization's vision, mission, and values. One of my favorite stories to illustrate this is a client that I had several years ago. They were a tech startup, and one of their values was grit, like being gritty. And that makes sense, right? They're this agile startup. You've got to be gritty and nimble. And so grit was one of their values. And they made a very big deal about that. Hey, to be successful in this organization in this season requires grit. So they created this little, like a digital badge, and they called it a grit gram, almost like a telegram, for those of you who are familiar with what a telegram is, right? Right. So they called it a grit gram. And it was a really simple, like digital badge. And they were taught from the time they were onboarded and then throughout the employee life cycle, when you see someone, whether it's a leader, it's across the organization, or it's one of your team members, do something gritty, right, that aligns with who we are and what we value here, send them a grit gram. Now, you may think that sounds really cheesy, but I am telling you, it was magical for their engagement and retention, because they started getting those dopamine hits that, hey, I do something gritty here. And that grittiness, right, is something that connects to a value that we have in the organization. So for you, I would say, what are ways that you can figure out, how to deliver recognition that's concrete and specific and individualized, but also aligned with who you are in your organization and what matters to you? We also know that the very best recognition, this is a big important part of the research, is that people do have preferences about how they are recognized. And listen, this is not about just catering to the whims of every employee. It's about saying, with some emotional intelligence, I actually know that, my team member over here, she would be mortified if I made her stand up and we all clapped for her in a team meeting. That's going to make her so uncomfortable, because I know her. So maybe I'm going to give her a very meaningful handwritten note instead. I'm going to do something that's a little more low key, right? So it is important that you're thinking about, how can I help this person feel recognized and seen and respected in a way that honors who they are as a unique person. Okay, the last little bit of pro tip advice I want to give you on recognition and what we know is that, according to research, the employees who are the highest engaged, right, and retained as a result of that, are those that say that they receive some kind of recognition at least once a week. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be just from a leader. It can be from a team member. It can be from one of their direct reports, but something once a week that says to them, oh, my contributions matter around here. Now, lest you think that you've got to walk around with like a tally mark. I don't want you to think that, right? Well, I check. Think about it more like, what are the systems and the structures and the rhythms as HR leaders, as people leaders that we can implement so that people are receiving regular recognition, maybe once a week, if we can swing it, right? Story I want to share about this that's personal is just to illustrate, I think. When I was a professor at Texas Tech, I was honored. I was nominated for an award. And you're like, wow, you're really recognizing yourself. Well, maybe I don't have a ton of team members, so I have to recognize myself. No, that's not the point. The point is not about recognizing me, but it's to say I was up for this award, and I ended up winning it, which was really meaningful to me. And there was a ceremony, and I got to go up in front of all my colleagues and receive this award. And it was, again, it was a very valuable experience for me. But that moment of kind of being in front of everybody made me a little like, I'm a little awkward in situations like that. But when I got back to my office, one of my colleagues who knew me very well and knew how competitive I am, I'm a sneaky competitive person, had taped this first place ribbon, little, from the Target dollar bin. They spent 99 cents on it probably, had taped this to my door. And on the back of it wrote, "You won. You made us proud today." Now, here's the reason I want to share that, because while the public recognition was meaningful, this ribbon was off the charts affecting to me in a completely different way, because it was concrete and individualized, because it was tied to our pride as a department, right? You made us proud meant something to me. So much so, I'm not really sure where like the little trophy is that I got, but you can't see this, but right above my workstation, I still have this ribbon hanging there. And it reminds me of that very meaningful experience. So I share that to say, right, it isn't the big red carpet stuff. It is the slow drip of feeling seen, heard, and valued. And so if you can improve the recognition rhythms in your organization, you're going to make a very big difference. Building a culture where employees feel seen, known, respected, and appreciated is going to drive engagement and retention. All right, let's keep moving. I want to make sure we get some time for questions too. So the last rhythm that I want to talk about, this is one where I see HR teams and people teams having a little bit more agency even than sometimes the first two can feel, because I do believe that you have a ton of agency to equip and to empower people leaders, but I also know that it does require somebody else kind of being on board. What I have found is this rhythm right here is one where HR leaders can really make a very big difference, where people leaders can make a big difference. And that is continuous employee listening. You notice the word continuous, slow drip, right? So only 3 in 10 employees currently would agree that at work their opinions seem to count. The good news, right, because we're on a roller coaster, the good news is that Gallup has found that when organizations invest in employee listening initiatives, if they can move that ratio from 3 to 10 to even just 6 in 10, they can realize a 27% reduction in turnover on average. So essentially what we mean by that is, if you can build an environment where all of your employees feel like they are listened to on that slow drip basis, on a regular basis, you're going to see turnover decrease statistically. But what does it mean to sort of do that on a regular basis in your organization? Well, here are a couple of things I'd want you to think about. And again, I don't have, unfortunately, the specific kind of answers for your organization, but maybe this will help you think about some ways you could do this and kind of customize. The first piece of it is, realizing how important it is that we're building a robust listening strategy across the life cycle. So instead of what we call episodic listening, where we listen maybe once a year and then we, gather data, we try to do something with it, and then we'll see you next November or whatever. We're building a listening strategy across the life cycle. So maybe it is that we're investing in some HR analytic tools to help us collect and analyze data. Maybe we're using AI. There's so much cool stuff that AI is helping HR with right now when it comes to employee listening. But maybe you're using some technology that you have. But in addition to that, it's also using different listening methods across the life cycle. So things like um, equipping your leaders to facilitate more effective one-on-ones that incorporate employee listening. Engagement surveys, yes, I still think they're very valuable. Facilitating focus groups or stay interviews. Town halls where you're creating forums for people to listen. So I'd encourage you to look at your life cycle and think, where in the employee life cycle are we building in listening touch points? Because organizations who do that well tend to see higher engagement and retention. All right, this next slide has the potential to stress you out, but I don't want it to. Okay, so stay with me. Here is a slide that the last thing I want to do is cause any shame, for an HR leader. I know what that feels like to sort of go, there's not enough time in the day. But what you're looking at is a couple of different types of listening methods across the employee life cycle. It's not an exhaustive list, but it shows you, again, from the moment that you're trying to attract, like in your talent acquisition, your recruiting, all the way to when an employee departs, right? Voluntarily, involuntarily, all the way across the life cycle. These are different kinds of listening strategies that you can use. Please hear me say this. You don't need to do all of them. Please don't attempt to do all of them. But could you look at your listening across the life cycle and think, where are just maybe a couple of touch points where we can build in some more listening rhythms? Because if our employees start to feel like their voices matter more, if their feedback matters more, it's going to drive engagement and retention. So whatever works in your organization, you'll have to kind of think through that. But my encouragement to you is learn what it is that matters the most, and then invest in initiatives where you're going to get the most ROI. In other words, just because there's a problem that you hear doesn't mean that that's the problem that employees really want you to focus on. I see this a lot. Employees will say to me when I'm doing engagement stuff, well, they really have been trying to work on this, and like, that's fine, but that isn't actually what we care about the most. In a lot of cases, by the way, it is the role ambiguity and the clarity piece that they care the most about. But learn what matters most, and then don't forget to share the collective voice back to your employees and show them how you're taking action. Would you believe that only 8% of employees believe that their organization takes any action on employee listening initiatives? Any action. So 8% of our employees, only 8%, think that we're doing anything with the data that we're gathering when we ask for it. So the way we close the gap there is we listen and we prioritize. We can't fix everything, but we prioritize, and then we do what a lot of organizations don't, and that is this very strategic formula. Are you ready for it? It's going to sound super sophisticated. We say, here's what we heard you say, and here's what we're doing. Now you're thinking that sounds very simple. Well, I'm here to tell you most organizations don't do that very well. Here's what we heard you say. Here's what we're doing. And then the next time you're going to use some kind of employee listening initiative, it's, hey, remember last year? Here's what we heard you say. Here's what we did. Let's keep moving. So share the collective voice back with your employees and show them how you're taking action. So here is one way that you can start growing in your employee engagement and your listening. There is a guide that I share with a lot of my clients. It's got 30 really good employee engagement questions that you could use in engagement surveys, or you could use in stay interviews or focus groups. So if you don't have something robust in your organization, this could be a launch pad for you. So there's a QR code here. I think we're going to share the link in the chat as well. If you have any trouble accessing it, you can always email me. But this is a list of questions that are really, really good for opening up dialogue with employees about the issues that drive engagement and retention. So hopefully that will serve as a help to you. Let me know if you have any trouble accessing it. If we were to apply the same amount of listening energy to the customer experience, or that we applied to the customer experience to the employee experience, we're going to see employee engagement skyrocket. We're going to see turnover decrease big time. So before we take just a few questions, I want to ask you to share in the chat. I would love to hear what some of your takeaways are. We talked about a lot of things today. And again, the last thing I want to do is to heap shame and guilt on you because I know what your lives are like. But what is even just one concrete thing that you could do in the next month to improve your engagement and retention? Because it has been my experience that those small improvements, improving that slow drip, is what's going to lead to big culture change. So I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your time and your energy today. I want to take a few questions if we've got time. Michelle, are there any questions that I can answer? And then we'll come back together and wrap up.
Absolutely, LeAnne. Thank you so much, first off, for sharing all that information this morning. This was such an engaging presentation. And I can speak on behalf of our audience as well. I mean, this was really, really fun. So thank you so much. And I do see a couple questions that have been coming through during our session. And I know we had a few that were submitted prior to the session as well. So folks on the line, if you have any additional questions, feel free to keep them coming. And don't forget to respond to that question that we just asked you. It's up on the slide now, and I did pop the question into the attendee chat. All right, LeAnne, let's dive right in. So one of the questions that I'm seeing is, what are some creative ideas to value caregivers that are always remote and when you don't have the staff to go out to everyone to show recognition and appreciation?
Okay, such a good question. And this is going to feel like a major cop out. Are you ready? What I would tell you is ask them. Ask them what would help you feel more valued and more connected. Asking them what creative ideas do you have is the answer to that question. What I will say too is that, when you're talking about any kind of like remote or distributed employee that's out and about, what the research tells us is employee needs are actually the same. So engagement, what it seems is that the same drivers of engagement for face-to-face employees also apply for those that are remote or distributed or kind of out on the field. What gets tricky is that research also shows that for remote or like asynchronous communication or those kind of employees, that it takes about 5 times as long for the clarity in communication than it does for a face-to-face employee. So what that means is you've got to get even a little bit more strategic about the channels that you use to send communication and the frequency. So you have to dial that up a little bit more even than you do with your in-person employees. So that's one thing I would say. But the heart of the question, like the answer, I should say, is ask them. Because not only, here's the cool thing, when you ask that question, it does 2 things. It's kind of like a 1-2 punch, which maybe isn't the best phrase because it makes it sound like there's like a volatile situation happening. But it's kind of a 1-2 punch because in addition to getting the ideas and the data that you need to hopefully do a better job with it, you're also sending the message that you value it. So it accomplishes 2 things. So that's how I would answer that, is go ask them, what creative ideas do you have, and see what happens. That's a great question. Okay, do we have any more?
We do, yes. We just had another one come through too, so we'll ask that one after this next one here. So the question here is, what is the best way to connect with employees when they are commission-based and they're maybe having a hard time finding new customers and they need help getting over the hump?
Okay, awesome. Couple of things. I was just having a conversation with one of my coaching clients the other day that's they're struggling in kind of a big way with reaching the outcomes and the goals like for the team. So it's a little bit different of a scenario. But what we talked about on the call was when you're experiencing, failure on your team or in your role, what's so important is that you're still sending messages that help people see how the work that they're doing today, even if it's not getting to the outcomes we want yet, is building momentum. It's moving the organization forward. It's connecting to our values. So what I would say is, in addition to what I said on the last question, asking, is I would also say, what can you do to dial messages about the process as opposed to just the outcome, right? Because we want to get there. We want to reach our goals. We want to get to, we want to hit our quota and all that good stuff. But there's also magic in reinforcing mission and purpose and values in the process. And that's a big motivating factor. It gives employees agency and also what we call internal, this is a nerd term, ready, but internal locus of control, which means when we do that, our employees start to feel like they actually do have agency to get to better outcomes, or they can tolerate a little bit of failure. It's kind of like, I'm a big sports person, and sometimes I'll say really great coaches will take pre-season like scrimmage loss. It's almost basketball season. So, like they'll take a preseason loss and they'll frame it in a way that helps their team see that we actually needed this loss. We needed this loss to help us reach our goals. And so I know that's kind of a tricky question when it comes to like the uniqueness of a specific role, but I do think it's part of it is dialing up messages about the process independent of the outcome. So hope that was helpful. All right. What else? What else we got?
Perfect. Thank you, LeAnne. Looks like we can finish up with this last question here. And folks on the line, I think I only see one response to the question that we asked you. So please pop in a quick answer here. We'd love to see your input on the question, what concrete thing can you do in the next month to improve your engagement and retention? So while you all are answering that, I'm going to ask LeAnne our final question here. So the last question that I'm seeing coming through, so it seems like this person, their owner, is ignoring recommendations of engaging with their employees like customers. So they're asking if you have any tips on what they can do if they aren't willing to invest in that.
Okay, just so they're not kind of bought in about engaging employees or the customers.
So they said engaging with employees like customers.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Oh, okay. I need like an hour to unpack that. I have like many follow-up questions to that. What I would say is maybe step one is that you've got to do some strategic listening, which I'm sure you've done. So I hope that doesn't sound like patronizing at all, because I'm sure you have done a lot of this already. But maybe it's doing some strategic listening to discern what are the misconceptions, or like where is there a lack of alignment about what outcomes we get when we invest in this. So where is the hang up? For me, that's something that I think we have to get really good at as HR leaders, is trying to close the gap on where is there a misunderstanding about what the outcomes are that we get when we invest in these things. So I would say part of it is your strategic listening to then customize messages that make your leader, your owner, or an executive in this case, see that by investing in these initiatives, it actually makes me look pretty awesome. And I know that's a really simple way of saying that, but what we know about persuasion, I used to teach persuasion and social movements at Texas Tech, is we know that people have to feel like they personally will experience success to get bought into things like this. So to me, there's something that has to happen there with some strategic listening to try to close that gap and tailoring messages to that unique person. It may be that the data alone is not going to do it. It may be that you dial up the data. Again, I don't know, depending on this person. So that's a tricky one to answer in just kind of a webinar Q&A format. So how about this? Shoot me an email. We can hop on a call and you can tell me the scoop, and I'm happy to help. But I hope that's helpful.
Amazing, LeAnne. Thank you so much. And I know we're a little bit over the top of the hour here. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up our Q&A there. But LeAnne, do you have any final comments on your end before we finish up with our session today?
See, Michelle, we just needed 3 more hours. That's all I'm
right.
for.
Next time.
The last thing I want to say, just as a reminder, is, the answer to your engagement and your retention challenges, it's not a cure-all, right? It's not a panacea, but it really is strategic communication across the employee life cycle. So I hope that you walk away with some really practical tools to help you think about what that could look like in your organization. Here's an additional way you can stay in touch with me. You can find me also on LinkedIn if you're there. I'm pretty active and would love to connect with you. But thank you so much for your engagement and your time today. Michelle, thanks for letting me hang with you for a little bit. I had a blast, and I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in my LinkedIn or in my inbox soon.
Amazing, LeAnne. Thank you so very much for opening up our Employee Retention Summit. And folks on the line, don't forget to check out that QR code that's up on the screen now. And I know we did mention that there is a link in the attendee chat widget, so don't forget to check that link out as well to grab some of the resources provided to you by LeAnne there. And there is a link also in the resource widget, same link that's in the attendee chat. So whichever one's easier for you to access, feel free to go ahead and click on that link there. And again, as a quick reminder, we did record this entire session today. So we'll be sending out a copy of the recording to each of you via email in about 24 hours. So keep your eyes open for that. And if you did attend our session live, some of you may or may not be watching this in a recording in a few days. If you are in the live attendee, you are eligible to receive our HRCI and SHRM credit codes for this session. And we'll be sending out an email in the same email with the recording with the HRCI and SHRM codes there. So keep your eyes open for that as well. One final note, don't forget to join us tomorrow for our panel discussion on workplace culture in the age of AI. If you haven't yet signed up, there is a link up on your screen now for you to do so. Thank you all again for joining us this morning. And thank you so much to LeAnne. And we'll see you tomorrow in our panel. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.